Good afternoon. My name is Ted Ritter. I'm the Dean of the School of Arts and Sciences at Virginia Union University. It is my pleasure, along with our partners at VCU, to welcome our participants from across the Commonwealth and across the country to the third session of the day of our day-long symposium, L. Douglas Wilder, Continuing 30 Years of History, Then and Now. As we celebrate this historic moment and the historic service of Governor Wilder, it also allows us to reflect on contemporary issues and challenges for the future. We thank you for your attendance, and we hope that his legacy will inspire you to be involved, to mentor young people, and to speak up regarding the inequities and helping to find solutions to the inequities in our society. We want to thank all of our sponsors. You've been able to see them as we have listed them on the screen. We thank them for their sponsorship of this program, and especially the session sponsor, Virginia is for Lovers. As everyone knows, this celebration was originally planned for last March. It had to be postponed until today, and how appropriate is being held today on Constitution Day. We are pleased now to turn our attention to our student panel and their views on civic engagement. Our moderator for today's panel is Bobbie Newell. Bobbie is the 86th Student Government President at Virginia Union University, leading what has been termed the Legacy Administration. Bobbie is a graduating senior majoring in criminal justice, originally from Queens, New York. In addition to serving as the president of the Virginia Union Student Government Association, Bobbie is a proud member of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated and currently serves as the second vice president for the Virginia Association of Chapters of Alpha Phi Alpha. Bobbie's civic engagement includes serving as a volunteer in New York State Senator Leroy Comrie's office, as well as serving as a youth pastor at Mount Horeb Baptist Church. His favorite quote, I have to mention Bobbie, his favorite quote, Matthew 19:26, "With man this is impossible, but with God all things are possible." Please join me in welcoming Mr. Newell and our student panel. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Dean Ritter. Once again, my name is Bobbie Newell, and I have the opportunity and privilege of being the moderator of today's panel discussion. But before I start, I'm going to give a brief bios about our panelists. First, we have Ms. Whitney Brown. She is a first-year graduate student and Wilder Fellow at Virginia Commonwealth University, pursuing her master's in public administration. She is a native of Richmond, Virginia. She holds a Bachelor's of Science in Science from Pennsylvania State University. Ms. Brown is highly confident and a methodical public servant with experience as a former 911 dispatcher, Richmond police officer, and emergency medical technician. She has a proven record in leadership and advocacy work and displays resilience with challenges and changes in complex environments. Ms. Brown is passionate about creating a world of critical thinkers and is deeply committed to improving lives through social justice, grassroots organizations, and resource equity for our nation's most underdeserved communities. Next, we have Mr. Lawan Dodge. Mr. Dodge is a senior majoring in criminal justice and hails from the P-Funk birthplace, Plainfield, New Jersey. Mr. Dodge is active in each community that he visits. On campus, he is a member of the Pre-Law Institute, collegiate member of the Central Virginia chapter of NOBLE, National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives, and tutor for student support services. He is a mentor at Carver Elementary School as part of Community and Schools of Richmond, and a tutor in his native Plainsville. He has also had the opportunity to be an undergraduate scholar with the University of Miami School of Law for the summer and worked for the United States Postal Service. In his spare time, he enjoys reading, cooking, and practicing music. Remembering the lessons of his grandparents, his favorite quote is, "Judge a man not by his possessions, but by his character." Next, we have Jamon J.K. Phenix. J.K. Phenix is an associate at Prism Group, a boutique-style public affairs and government relations firm based in Washington, D.C. He assists Prism Group in the legislative areas of workforce innovation, women and minority small businesses, and entrepreneurship growth. His primary goal is to help corporations, profits, and trade associations navigate complex legislative and regulatory environments. Before Prism Group, J.K. worked in communications at a political style firm here in Virginia, as well as a district and federal intern for 2 Virginia members of Congress. As a public servant, with a heart of grassroots engagement, he has worked on local and state electoral campaigns. Additionally, J.K. has left his mark on Virginia Union by serving as the 84th Student Body President, Honors Program Ambassador, and Charter Member of Virginia Union College for African American Men. J.K. is also a native of Atlanta, Georgia, and he holds a Bachelor's of Arts degree in History and Political Science and a research certificate in Political Campaign Management from the University of Richmond. Lastly, we have Ms. Hillary Small, a native of Richmond, Virginia, a second-year master's student in public administration, and has been appointed to the Virginia State Board of Elections. Ms. Small holds a BA in Government and International Politics from George Mason University and enjoys traveling and exploring the outdoors. That is our panelists for today. If we could just give them a brief round of applause for a few seconds. Thank you, thank you. So let us begin. So we know why we're here and about civic engagement. So my question to everyone here is, how do you define civic engagement? Can we start with ladies first? So Ms. Brown, how do you define civic engagement?
Hi, everyone. Yes, I'm Whitney. So I would define civic engagement as any form of exchange between citizens and their government, whether that's through volunteering, through grassroots organization, through protests, anything like that.
Thank you. Great response. Ms. Small.
Yeah, to echo Whitney's point, I think we need to expand the definition of what people think about civic engagement. And that's really about coming together in your communities as the role of citizen. So building your communities, talking to people in your communities, and then creating change in your communities.
Wonderful response. Mr. J.K.
Yeah, well, I'll first say I'm extremely happy to be here and to be with you all to underscore both Hillary's and Whitney's point. I believe at its core, civic engagement refers to the ways in which citizens participate in the life of a community in order to improve conditions for others or to help shape the community's future. I mean, particularly, this engagement is yielded by the community's desire to have a centralized power in which in turn it propagates the community's concern and creates solutions. So that's that intersection, and that's why civic engagement is so important.
Thank you, thank you. Mr. Dotch, how do you define civic engagement?
Hi, yes, good afternoon to everyone. I would define civic engagement as similar to what everybody else has stated, as being informed and also taking action, being informed of what's going on in your community as well, and also taking action across multiple forms, whether it be protesting, going to the local city council meeting, even planting a garden or cleanup. It's just all about taking action and being informed.
Thank you, thank you. So my next question is, and some of y'all already touched on it already, but I want to get deeper into it. Why is civic engagement important, especially in 2020? Why is civic engagement important in 2020? Ms. Brown, we'll start back with you.
I believe civic engagement is very important because it shapes policy. It shapes what is going on in the world and how we as people react to policy and what we don't like about policy and what we do like about policy. We can use our movement now, our Black Lives Matter movement, for an example. That's a form of civic engagement.
Thank you, wonderful answer. Ms. Small.
So I think as a nation, we're starting to recognize our history, our violent history rooted in white supremacy. And so now we're thinking about how to move forward and build new systems that are rooted in justice and other moral values. So I think for that to happen, we'll need everyone coming together and being engaged together to build these new systems.
Yes, thank you, Ms. Small. Great response. Mr. J.K., why is civic engagement important?
Yeah, I mean, to really underscore, as I've mentioned before, both Whitney's, Hillary's, and Lawan's, I guess, sentiment, civic engagement is the sheer representation of what you will have of a community. But what we do know now, of course, given contemporary events, we see why civic engagement is going to be critical for underserved communities, particularly communities of color. What we do know now is that civic engagement is in our society is decreasing. I mean, especially among younger Americans. According to research, only 29% believe that we are living in a country that is governed democratically, or they believe, in short, that a democracy is the foundation of how we should live. And I think that that's something that we should worry about. So to really just wrap the whole issue up, civic engagement at its core is going to be how everyone is represented in a society. But however, what we see in contemporary events, civic engagement as it relates to democracy is slowly starting to erode, and it's starting with millennials and younger people.
Can you, before I move on to Lawan, can you touch a little bit more on what you just said, the last part with millennials and younger people? Why is it important for us? Yes, for us.
Yeah, I think, Bobbie, that's a great follow-up question to ask. And as I've mentioned before, given contemporary events, we know that the leaders that we elect is going to lead the way for us in the next 50 or so years, but particularly in the areas of racial justice and environment. As we see I can add the third one with health and disparities. But as we see with these three particular issues hitting this country and this nation all at one time, and I would even argue the world all at one time, civic engagement really involves, and we'll touch on this later, getting out to the ballot box, but also advocacy. As Whitney touched on previously, participating in organizations like Black Lives Matter, participating in grassroots organizations in your community matters all the most. But just, I guess, in short, these three issues as it relates to environment, racial justice, and health, that is why younger people, specifically Gen Zers and millennials, will need to participate, because if we do not, then leaders will be elected that don't represent us, and in the end, will literally put our existence at stake.
All right, thank you. And we will talk about going to the ballots later on in this panel discussion. Mr. Dotch, why is civic engagement important?
Yes, and to echo off JK, like he hit a lot of points that like I can't wait till we especially talk about later on. But I think it's important for civic engagement, not only because this year is an election year, but because also we can't forget the words to the preamble of the Constitution, we the people. If we the people wish to form a government or a society that we best seem to be fair and equitable to all, not just to a certain minority, we need to also take the necessary actions to achieve this possible dream.
Thank you, thank you. So America has a history of protest. From the beginning of time, we saw from the Boston Tea Party to protest against during the Civil War, Civil Rights Movement in the 50s and 60s, anti-war protests, women's suffrage, economic protests, and now our Black Lives Matter in the 21st century. Would you regard these protests that we've seen over time to be a form of civic engagement?
I definitely think those things are forms of civic engagement. One thing that's so beautiful about civic engagement, I don't think it's up to me or you to police what we define as civic engagement being. You know, some people might not see protest as being a good form of civic engagement. Actually, we can go back to Henry David Thoreau's version of civil disobedience when we talk about civic engagement as well. When, you know, during the Boston Tea Party and all those things where people maybe broke a law to create policy changes and, you know, to have things more their way. So I think that's important when discussing civic engagement. And also, I think we need to discuss that not everybody has the same access to civic engagement. So historically, one of the biggest things about civic engagement was voting. And we know now that Black and brown bodies are disenfranchised more than other people when it comes to voting. So we don't even have the same access to civic engagement.
That was deep, Ms. Brown. Thank you. Thank you. Ms. Small.
Yeah, I know with this conversation, many people talk about nonviolence or violence in the binary, but as we know from Martin Luther King Jr., he spoke about the riot as the language of the unheard. And so protest does not happen in a vacuum. It's a response to many times people feeling like they're not heard. They are feeling like the politicians or those that have been appointed to protect them have done almost nothing to change the material day-to-day issues in their life. So I think we need to contextualize it as well when we talk about protest and civic engagement.
Nice, nice. Mr. J.K.
Yeah, I mean, to hit on the points that you made at the top of the question, in our genesis as a nation, protests have been there. And in fact, we would not be where we are as a republic without those trailblazing protests such as the civil rights movement, such as the abolitionist movement, such as the women's suffrage movement, such as even movements in healthcare. But I want to get to a point when I want to get to a part of the answer that Hillary gave. That Whitney gave. I guess giving reference to the lack of access to civic engagement. And I guess, and this is to totally highlight her entire answer as being true, but I guess I'll also add on to that in a separate way and just add that civic engagement is free, right? To be able to advocate, it's a very powerful tool that many people have access to. And I think one of the most powerful parts of civic engagement, or the most powerful tools of civic engagement, is social media. But just in short, I wanna really sum it up that it's free. It's something that everybody can participate in. And in fact, we've seen with successful protests and successful movements like the civil rights movement, we've seen masses of poor people participating. And I think we even see it today with a lot of poor people or people who are disenfranchised and aren't able to vote, participate. We've seen that over the summer. We see that with the Black Lives Matter. And we also see that with the Poor People's Campaign headed by William J. Barber in North Carolina. So I think in short, what I really want to say is that let's not forget that civic engagement is free. It's not something that in a democracy we have to pay for, although we understand that voting is something that many people are being, pulled away from. We can all contribute in some way, be it a Facebook post, be it family that we try to advocate and sway to go out and vote. But at its genesis, I would say civic engagement in this nation has been here well before even the first bullet was fired in the Revolutionary War.
Mr. J.K., thank you for your response. Thank you. Mr. Dotch.
Yeah, I would definitely say all the events that has happened like in American history and elsewhere around the world is definitely forms of civic engagement. Not just also limiting to like during the civil rights movement, but if you think about in the early 1900s regarding food and health standards, the issue about fair labor as well. the issue that some miners have taken, some laborers have taken, saying that, you know, we're not going to work 16, 17, 18 hours a day with our health not only in danger, but our economic health as well, because we are trying to make the best for our children. And so even in the form of, some may say, a book of fiction such as The Jungle, which exposed the meatpacking industry and helped also lead to legislation with the Clean Meat Act, and also Theodore Roosevelt, legendary trust buster, breaking up unfair labor practices to ensure that all have a chance of success. So I would definitely say that any form of civic engagement, even as simple as a Google search about a certain policy, that is a form of civic engagement, because you are becoming aware of the situation, and then you will also take the necessary action to bring the right change.
I definitely agree with you, Mr. Dotch. And we live in society in the 21st century where we have access to technology on our phones, where we could easily access anything that we could think of in any forms of civic engagement, whether it's a book, volunteering somewhere, or educating not only ourselves, but educating our communities. So thank you, everyone. This next question I have, we don't have to go in order or anything, right? But if you want to speak on it, you can. I encourage everyone to speak on it. But one of the most basic forms of civic engagement is voting. However, many students and other young people in America do not always vote. So with this upcoming election and elections to come, not only presidential, on our local and national levels, how can we encourage young people to get out there and vote?
I think I'll just
Okay, so I can start off with that. I think a way we can encourage younger people to start to vote is by making it easier to vote. You know, we're in an era of COVID-19 right now. It's not easy to vote. It's getting harder to vote, actually. You know, one recent thing I learned about that I'm kind of ashamed that I didn't know about was early voting. I never had heard of it before this year. I wasn't aware that you could vote early, or that I know now that they changed some of the voting laws where you don't have to have an excuse to absentee vote. But, you know, some of those things are good that they're putting into place, but I believe we could be doing more. For example, when I went to school in Pennsylvania, I was still a resident of Virginia. That was my first presidential election I could vote in. And unfortunately, my ballot didn't make it in time and my vote didn't count. So had it been easier for me to, you know, get my vote to Virginia, I think that would have made more of a difference for me personally. So definitely making it easier for us to vote would be a great start.
Good. I love the response, and I hope you get your ballot in soon this time and do early voting. Mr. J.K., I see you unmuted yourself.
Yeah, I love the points that Whitney gave. I think that we can't underestimate the many ways that we can participate in going to that ballot box this coming November. But I want to start by saying just last year, only 53% of citizens viewed American democracy positively. And this number has surely dropped as the advent of the national health crisis, economic downturn, and national reckoning on systemic and racism and the federal government's poor response and lack thereof has manifested in desperate ways. So to say that, I know that I think that there is a feeling you know, that many people are feeling desperate right now and feel as though that their government is not working for them and in fact working against them. And so I think that we have to attack that at its core, especially among younger people, as we see although our advocacy and our activism is rising, we need to ensure that our participation in the system, in our republic, is rising with it. And I'll also say, if you are not registered to vote, or if you cannot locate your voting place, go to vote.org, I believe, and you are able to access, and if you are registered to vote, your exact polling place. If you are a citizen of the Commonwealth of Virginia, you are able to, I believe the Virginia Elections Board, and we'll probably hit on this later in our webinar, if they have an entire board, entire website, I'm sorry, that you can go on and access to ensure that you know where to vote. And unfortunately, the anecdote that Whitney gave about her, not knowing how to vote in previous elections, that is amplified even among the greatest of us, specifically of those who are in poor communities and those who go to historically Black colleges and university. When I was SGA president at Virginia Union, I noticed that when we showed up in November elections, no matter if it was a midterm or presidential election back in 2016 and so on and so forth, many of students who went to Virginia Union, one, didn't understand where they voted, where they were to vote, and two, when they did go, they didn't have the proper identification. So there we see many problems amplifying in desperate ways that we really have to attack. So I urge everyone, and I'm sure the panelists will urge everyone to, one, go get registered. Two, if you can, vote early. Three, understand where you're voting at. And four, track your vote. Not track your vote in the way where you're going to double vote, but track your vote in the system. I know the Virginia Department of Elections, they have a system where they show where you have successfully voted. Ensure that you do that.
I think also we need to make it easier to vote for certain populations in Virginia. If you look at the state of Virginia, formerly incarcerated individuals that have felonies on their record, they can vote, but they have to go through a restoration of rights process, which is particularly onerous. And so right now I'm working with the group New Virginia Majority. We go out and we work to register people to vote and also help them go through that process. But we will also be working in the next General Assembly session to try to get this automatic. So people, when they return, they've done their time. All they need to do is register to vote like everyone else. It's automatic and there's no questions or worries about what will happen in that restoration of rights process.
Nice. I have a question. Oh, Mr. Dotch, you could go first. I'll write my question down.
Sure. No, but as everyone hit on, like, I'm gonna start with Whitney. Like, I was unaware of the fact that I can also early vote, and also the fact that how in some states it's easier to vote than others. So, for example, in New Jersey, you don't necessarily need voter identification. As long as you register, you can vote. Whereas in other states, not only do you need a form of identification, but it must be a certain type, either a driver's license or a passport. Sometimes even a military ID is not enough for the information allow for you to vote. And so I would encourage everyone to vote for the candidate who best aligns with your view, which I know is hard because ideally we all want the candidate who is 100% dead on with our views. We're going to go forward, but sometimes the candidate who may not align fully with your views may give you the best token of appreciation. So, for example, there may be some candidate. I know with our generation right now, our biggest issue is student loans. So there are some candidates who say that, yes, we will completely abolish your student loans, we will forgive them. And then there's other candidates saying, no, we are absolutely not going to do that. You may have a candidate who say, I may not be in favor of completely forgiving your student loans, but I will argue and help pass legislation to increase Pell Grants, to vote to decrease the government interest rates, or in this case also, hopefully maybe even private interest rates. And so I think the biggest thing, as which everybody has hit on, is the issue of fair access to voting, making sure that you know who you're voting for, and also that we strive, once again, to pick the best candidate who aligns with our view, who may not always be the most ideal.
Lawan, you definitely touched on a good subject as we start to vote. Do your research on these candidates, I feel like some of us are truly born into political parties, and we just stick with that and then we just vote for them. And sometimes that's not always good. But Ms. Small, you touched on a good topic about restoration of rights. And we see a state like Florida and LeBron James, he's working with groups to, I think it's in Florida, if I'm not mistaken, to get people rights restored. So I know you're a part of that committee. How is that? What is that process like?
So as long as I believe, as long as you're not on probation or parole, there is an app created now through the Commonwealth where you basically fill in your information, it goes through the process, and then you get your rights restored. Basically, it's just the app through, I believe it's the Commonwealth's office, and then you get notification that your rights have been restored, and then it's fairly simple, but like I said, it is onerous in that it's an extra step.
Thank you, and we appreciate the work that you do. But I know, as I saw the video of President Obama, I think it was this morning, that he said that even in this upcoming election, we might have to just do the old-fashioned vote, mailing in our ballot, especially for our generation. We're not accustomed to that. We go to the polls, but we have to know that there are other ways of voting in our elections, and the old-fashioned mail-in is one of them. But let me move on to the next question. So we know that this is the 30th anniversary of Governor Wilder's inauguration and his role in local community and in the Commonwealth. Right, and he was a good example of how a person can make change and improve the quality of life through many public service. So my question is, how do we engage our people in our communities to be more involved in campaigns, running for office, and work in government? How can we do that in our generation or in society? We feel like not a lot of people are running for office, or that I might see, or that you might see. So how can we get more involved in office? We could start with you, Ms. Small.
I'll go, everyone. I think, Bobbie, what a great question. And just to backtrack to the last question, and everyone's answers, primarily Hillary's answer regarding returning citizens, we have to ensure that their vote is counted, and understand in the logic of it all. Voting is it is your right to citizenship, and if we are saying that returning citizens can't vote, we're also saying that they aren't citizens, and we're also dehumanizing them. And as a democracy, we must understand that. And that's why I think Governor Northam's move to ensure that returning citizens receive the right to vote in the past 2 years has been specifically important to Black Americans and Black Virginians at that. I guess to move on to the question that you just mentioned, Bobbie, about the way in which Governor Wilder has trailblazed a path for younger people to participate, specifically represent at the civic level, is extremely important. How do we encourage more younger people to get involved in campaigns and run for office? Is I think we need to make sure, and this goes for government officials, make sure that we make it more appealing, we make it more fun. And I think in the very little ways, I think a great way that has been amplifying it again on social media has been the way Democratic Vice President candidate Kamala Harris, she has been putting short clips on a video of her running down the airplane stairs when she unloads off the airplane. And I think that, at its core, while that may seem quote unquote cool, that actually catches younger people's eyes. But let us never forget where we are right now as it relates to representation. As a Black man right now sitting in the nation where we are having a national reckoning on race, I understand that people who look like me aren't particularly in governor roles. And that, to underscore this, there are 3 African-American governors and back in 2018 who ran, 3 African-American Democrats were on the electoral ballots out of 27, I believe, who ran in 2018. Of course, none of them won. And I would also say that just 2 Black Americans have ever been elected governor. That is Governor Deval Patrick who was elected to 2 terms in Massachusetts. And then, of course, our very own L. Douglas Wilder, who was elected in the early 90s. And so we must understand that there is a huge disparity, there's a huge gap in representation. And that's why having people like Senator Kamala Harris, having people like Georgia State Representative Stacey Abrams, and even Andrew Gillum down in Florida run, right? And that's why having people like former South Carolina's governor, Nikki Haley run as well, not only being a woman, but being a woman of color, and run with the true values that represent a much younger, a much diverse nation.
I was muted. Mr. J.K., you hit the nail right in the coffin. We'll take another response and we'll move on to the next questions. Ms. Small and Ms. Brown, will any of you would like to respond to that question?
I think Hillary was saying something, yeah.
I like JK's point of, and I've heard this with community members as well. We need a revival. We need parties. We need block parties. We need cookouts. We really need to have fun with this. Shouldn't be boring. It shouldn't be, like droning through a city council meeting where it's like monotone the whole time. We can have fun with this. And I think whether it's us on this panel or our neighbors, we can do that pretty easily and get people excited.
Thank you. So our next question before, what is the role of higher education in encouraging civic engagement? What can VCU and VUU do to provide opportunities and inspiration for students to get engaged in civic engagement? Anyone can answer this one. I know we have grad students, current undergraduates, 2 undergraduate students, recent graduate, or you can answer, what has your university do to help inspire you to get involved in civic engagement?
So I'll speak on my behalf, like attending Virginia Union University. Historically speaking, it was the college students who took on the role of implementing the change. Like, for example, during the Civil Rights Movement, it wasn't just all about Martin Luther King. It was numerous students at North Carolina A&T, Virginia Union University, Richmond 34. And so it's always been fostered among us to take the necessary action to make the change. Also, in fact, how I constantly get emails every day from our Office of our Office of Professional Development about different opportunities, whether it be legislation intern in the governor's office or in the mayor's office or Congressional Black Caucus or other numerous of avenues also to get the necessary change. And so universities already do a great job of pushing for their students to take that change in initiatives.
Thank you. Ms. Brown, would you like to answer before we go? Because we do have some questions people have.
Sure, I can answer. I think one of the roles for higher institutions to promote civic engagement is just keeping us informed. VCU sends me emails every day and I do read them, and I am, grateful and thankful for the opportunity to be at such a great institution. And even in my undergraduate experience at Penn State, we did demonstrations a lot at Penn State, and I believe we were supported by our faculty and staff members a lot. So just being supportive of your students, making sure that they know you'll show up along with them and helping us out. This is a team effort, not just a me effort or you effort. So we have to do things together.
Great. So we do have a few questions people have asked. So from Mr. Holland, he asked, how can we work towards 90% voting in all of elections? Any one of us could talk about that. Ms. Small, can we start with you? How can we work towards
I think we just go back to Whitney's point, making it easier. We've got technology now, like we've talked about, websites, apps, and I know the Department of Elections is working hard on that accessibility point. to make it easier. And then also, I think we need to start talking to each other in person, of course, 6 feet away now in the pandemic, but talking to our neighbors and really getting that momentum on the ground.
Thank you. Mr. Dotch, let's go with you.
Sure. Hillary hit also a number of great points. I will also add potentially shifting elections towards the weekends. I mean, oftentimes elections happen in the middle of a work week. Think about it. Most people probably going to work, going to school, numerous of activities happen throughout the day. By the time they get home, they have to start preparing for other necessary activities. And it often slips their minds that, oh my goodness, today was election day. And so when I try and make the mad dash to the polling place, it closes within 1 minute. Or in some instances, the lines are so long that you stand in line and you're thinking, I could be doing something else right now. Why am I standing here? You know, I should have did this, but I'm tired. So I think if we shift elections toward the weekends where people do not typically have as much responsibility, that will also help increase the number of participation in voting.
Nice.
I don't want to. I don't want to. I think Lawan, I guess to say, is a phenomenal person. I know him personally, but I don't want to reject his sentiment on the spot. But I think I have to. I think shifting the elections to the weekend, I think that is just, in my opinion, that's nonsense. Hey, look. It's as simple as this. If we make Independence Day a federal holiday, why not make voting a federal holiday, right? Election Day a federal holiday. If you want participation, you must also understand that Lawan makes a great point as well, that especially if you are dealing with lacking resources and you have 2 to 3 jobs or you are a student, you don't always have the opportunity to go vote, in the middle of the day. So I do think we have to make a push for the federal government to make it a federal holiday. And one of my lasting points to get to that 90% threshold is what we dream of right now. We must understand that we have, as people, as private citizens, have a responsibility to go to that ballot box and stand in the wind and the rain. I think a good testament of that was our dear late Congressman John Lewis of the 5th Congressional District of Georgia, who marched on the Edmunds-Pettus Bridge through the wind, rain, sleet, and snow, and even got beat for the right to vote. And must understand also, as we are living in this very contemporaneous time of COVID-19, that this is not the very first time that the nation has voted in the middle of peril. Back during the Civil War, we elected Abraham Lincoln as president. And I believe re-elected, during a civil war, and many Americans voted en masse by mail. So we got to understand that we have a personal responsibility as private citizens. And if we want the system and government to work for us, we must civically engage in that government and elect our officials.
Great. And Mr. J.K., you basically answered a question that I was going to ask next, that Dr. Rodriguez asked, should higher eds make election day a day off for all of their students? So thank you. So a little jump in the curve right there, but I appreciate your answer. Ms. Brown, your response to how can we work towards 90% of voting in all of elections?
I think JK echoed all my sentiments, so thanks, JK.
Not a problem, not a problem. So we have another question from Mr. Charles Nicholson. What is the difference between civic engagement and community organizing, such as rallies? So Ms. Brown, we can start with you.
Sure. Yeah, I think I kind of answered this question earlier too. So like I said, one of the best things about civic engagement is, I don't think you and I get to define what it is. I do think that rallying and protesting and all that is a form of civic engagement because it leads to, or it can lead to, policy change. So, if that's what you think civic engagement is, then that's what I think it is too. And also just to point out, like, I feel like a new form of civic engagement is social media. So I see on Instagram all the time, you know, people are posting information about what's happening in other states, like the Breonna Taylor case. All of that is a form of civic engagement as well.
Yeah, and I think specifically community organizing, you look at the greatest example I think we have of a community organizer is Ella Baker. And what she did was she came and she put her ego aside and she connected people. I hear all the time people say there's so many different organizations doing great things, but they're not talking to each other. And so that's, I think, one of the greatest things that a community organizer can do. And we see it in Ella Baker's legacy.
Nice. Mr. Dodge?
Yes, I completely agree with Whitney. I don't think civic engagement and community organizing, I don't think they're like mutually different. I think they are all together as one. It's just a matter of our definition to it. But also, I am so glad that Hillary mentioned Ella Baker. I remember a great professor of mine, Dr. Walker, always talked about the legacy of Ella Baker, always talking about it's not about who necessarily holds the title or the position if the 99%, that vast majority, does not have a role in it. And so it is true that we have multiple organizations, but sometimes there is a lack of communication. And so I do believe that we have people more like Ella Baker, those who will be willing to step out, go to speak to everyone and say, hey, we all play an important role. I don't care if you're the senior vice president to the person who just knocks on doors, for example. You all play a very important role.
Nice. Mr. J.K.?
Everybody has mentioned something that and contributed to really great answers. And I would just simply say, in addition to, I love the Ella Baker point, you think of somebody like a Jackie Robinson, Muhammad Ali, all of these great figures, even LeBron James, to the distinct of Beyonce, who participate in this activism. And let's understand, being civically engaged is never complete until you make that vote. So I can believe in activism, but I must also understand my activism won't turn into advocacy until I go make that vote, right? My wants, my desires as an American citizen won't materialize until I go make that vote for people, to Lawan's point, who identify with what I believe in. So no matter what you believe in, I think it all yields back to who are you voting for and making sure that you vote. That's very important, particularly, and may I never understate, in these times.
Thank you. Thank you, Jake.
Also, one more thing I want to highlight is nonprofits. Nonprofits are an amazing way to be civically engaged because, you know, you have these private institutions that are advocating for public goods and that often, you know, help out with public goods. You know, you have nonprofits such as the Virginia ICLU, you have Planned Parenthood, you have OAR, you have all of these nonprofits that also go along with civic engagement and just that help shape and change policy as well.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. This is going to be, I think this might be the last question as we close up a little bit. This is for everyone, all of the panelists. The last statement, or one last statement about the importance of civic engagement, what it means to you and to the future generations. So what's the importance of civic engagement to you, what it means to you and to the future generations coming up behind us. Ms. Brown, we can start with you.
You said, what is civic engagement to me? Civic engagement is just the foundation of change for me. It's my why. It's the way I advocate. It's, you know, how I want to make the world a better place. So for me, that's civic engagement. And how I engage in civic engagement, I always do work in my community. I always make sure I'm an informed citizen and that I try to inform my friends as well. So those are the ways I practice civic engagement.
Thank you. Let's go with Mr. Dotch.
Sure. I would say that the form of civic engagement is, like I said, staying informed and taking the action, because I want the ideal world to be set in place, or at least make the attempt to make an ideal world for the next generation. And if I have the ability to perhaps be in a position to advocate for others who may not have that opportunity, then I would do my best. I try to always hear not just those who may not necessarily have the voice, but also hear the other side of those who may sit in a necessary position to try and work out an agreement, a compromise. And I think that's what we're missing too much out on, the ability to sit down, have a conversation, work out the compromise. No, it's not going to be what everybody wants, but it's going to be what the best decision is. And the beautiful thing of it is, if it doesn't work out, then we can try it again.
Thank you. Ms. Small.
I really like that that point, Lawan, that you just said. I think, like I said in the beginning, we are talking about creating new systems that are different than what we've seen in the past. And we are living in unprecedented times, whether it's us living under the carceral state or us trying to live and work under the climate crisis. But we need to have everyone at the table in the public square with their ideas, and we need to hash things out so we truly can live in a better place and have these new systems that hopefully the Zoomers and our children can live fruitfully in.
Great response, Mr. J.K.
I love everyone's response, and I'll just give my what the civic engagement to me means to me personally. And I would say the definition of civic engagement go all the way back 400 years to the year 1619, when the very first African slaves stepped foot on this continent in the very Commonwealth of Virginia. That is very important, and that's where my civic engagement starts. It also moves up right through the years, in I believe the 18th and 19th century, when slaves rebelled, people like Nat Turner, people like Harriet Tubman, that was while we did not see that as a form of civically engaged, it was being a part of rejecting a system that was, of course, it's standing then. So I would say that is what civic engagement is about, right? Rejecting something, a system, a higher authority, an institution that doesn't represent you. But also for me, civic engagement moves up through the years. It goes through women's suffrage, allowing my grandmother, my great-grandmother, the right to vote. It goes through the civil rights movement, allowing me to sit at a lunch counter. For those in the Richmond 34, it allowed them to sit at the Talharmer's lunch counter. For me, it moves up, right? It moves through the years of 1964, 65. It moves through the years of 1967, 68, when all of the civil rights legislation was passed and President Lyndon B. Johnson signed it into law. For me, civic engagement also moves up through the years of the 70s and the 80s, while we've seen the carceral state, as Ms. Small has so lovely underscored, grow in our nation. And mass incarceration has amplified in deep ways between the 70s and the 90s. Civic engagement for me also persisted this summer, as we've seen, unfortunately, on May 25th. George Floyd, die at the hands of state, of our government, as we've seen in many more times, often in viral videos. Civic engagement for me is just voting. And I think that's what it leads us to vote. Why it's important is because it's literally how we would have our voice as a citizen. And one of the last things I do want to leave this panel with, and I want to leave Virginia Union and Virginia Commonwealth with, is that we are all one, and to be civically engaged, to Hillary's point, to be in that town square declaring our voice. It's something that did not just persist or happen over 200 years ago during the founding of our nation. It's something that happened thousands of years ago in the time of Rome, right? This is when great empires were created and spread knowledge and whatnot. And so I would simply say that I love this intersection of Virginia and Commonwealth of Virginia Union getting together to hold a panel of this size, because we know it has not always been like this. It has not always been this way. And if we cannot continue to have these conversations, then we'll see ourselves reliving history time and again. So for Richmond, this is an important moment, right? For the Commonwealth of Virginia, we see that this is an important moment. For this nation, right? Being civically engaged, having conversations like this, and incubators like Virginia Union and Virginia Commonwealth University come together and celebrate people like L. Douglas Wilder, but also celebrating the forthcoming of leaders, right? Like Justin Fairfax, or like a governor, or like a child of Governor Northam, right? That's where it's important at, and that's where we have to continue to have these conversations.
Thank you, everyone. For me, civic engagement really just means being involved, educating yourself and the people around you, going out to those town hall meetings, going to the community center or wherever our politicians are, our leaders in our community, in our state, in our nation. I had the privilege and honor a few weeks ago to go to the March on Washington. And that was one of the biggest forms of civic engagement I've ever been a part of in my life. And I'm reminded of my grandmother's story that she wasn't allowed to vote. So now I'm able to vote, and I always want to go out and vote, even if it's the littlest things. It doesn't matter if it's a presidential election or vote for our local congressman, congresswoman, or state senator, or even our, so I'm from New York, so we have borough presidents. Things like that count. Your voice, your vote matters. Don't let anyone tell you it doesn't matter. And we are being the trailblazers. Each generation is a trailblazer for the next generation. So we're going to continue to fight and be civically engaged and for things that we believe in. Thank you. And I'm going to hand this back over to Dr. Dean Ritter. Thank you.
Thank you, Bobbie. And thank our panelists. Outstanding job. This generation, unfortunately, is growing up in a time of unprecedented issues facing our society, dealing with problems of our past and some uncharted waters like the pandemic. I'm optimistic hearing the well-reasoned, well-thought-out, well-articulated responses from our panel. I'm optimistic about our future, and I'm optimistic, and I look forward to seeing what each of you will do with your gifts in the future as well. I want to thank our audience, our participants for your attendance. I want to again thank our sponsors, especially Virginia's for Lovers, for sponsoring this section. We will be taking a break shortly from the symposium. Want to remind everyone that our final symposium will start at 3 o'clock. It will include a panel moderated by Dr. Larry Sabato from the University of Virginia Center for Politics, who will be moderating a national panel discussing the 2020 election. Of course, we are less than 50 days from November the 3rd. I think those of us who are political and political scientists, and those of us who just generally pay attention, a lot of times we say every 2 years or 4 years, this is the most important election of our lifetime. I think perhaps this time that may well be true. This may be the most important election of our lifetime. So we look forward to the panel and their insights on the upcoming election. Let me remind the participants that you will need to join that session via a new session link. That should have been in your confirmation email. It's also posted in the chat box. So we hope to see you back at 3 o'clock. And again, my heartfelt thanks to Virginia Union and to VCU for the sponsorship of this very monumental, historic moment. And certainly, again, thanks to this outstanding panel that we've just witnessed. And we'll see you back at 3 o'clock.